Okay, so this is for the River Runners Oral History Project, and we're here on the Stanton trip. We're at South Canyon. This is the Stanton Photo-match trip of 1994, and we're here with. Actually, how about if you tell us who you are and just give us a bit of a rundown on your river running career.
Okay, this is George Wendt here. It's September 10th, 1994, and it's a pleasure to be down here in the canyon about 29 years after my first trip, which was in 1965 with Ted Hatch. I was a commercial passenger on his trip at that time. It was a Sierra Club trip, and it took 10 days to go from Lee's Ferry to Temple Bar, and I already knew I was a river runner at that point, but as an individual, there was practically no way to get a permit to float down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon on a private permit because the Park Service had all kinds of regulations, including posting of bonds and having a rim party and having an aerial overflight a couple times during the trip. But then the final requirement that we could not satisfy was that we needed to have somebody as trip leader who had been down the canyon previously. Well, it turned out later it had to be someone who had been a guide on a trip previously, but I thought by going with Ted Hatch as a passenger, I would somehow be able to fit the Park Service requirement. Anyway, that was in 1965, and then I made my first trip under my own steam down here in 1967, and we had 4 10-man rafts, 3 of which we rode as a triple rig, 1 that was rode as a standalone unit. And then in 1968 I did a couple trips down here, and in 1969 I think we did 3 trips, and I really loved the Grand Canyon. That was next to Glen Canyon was my favorite river environment, and so we became a commercial outfitter. I think it was in 1969 or maybe it was in 1970. At the time we were called George Wendt Expeditions, and so many people asked us, what? They didn't understand the name George Wendt. George was my partner, Ed George, and my last name being Wendt. So then in 1972, we became OARS because we were one of the 2 original historic outfitters that always went without motors. And Martin Litton was the other one running Grand Canyon Dories. And so that gets us up into sometime in the mid-70s.
But this trip in 1965 wasn't your first river running experience.
No, actually I had been privileged to go down Glen Canyon in 1962, and we saw the canyon just before most of it was inundated by Lake Powell, and that really was the catalyst which got me interested in river trips. I'd been a backpacker for many years previous to that, but just the ability to throw all your gear on a raft and have really a pretty effortless trip with a little excitement thrown in was a brand new experience for me. And so I became a confirmed river runner at that point, and I have run most of the canyons in the Green and Colorado River system, and we've done some things up in Idaho and Oregon and British Columbia, so we've done lots of river running over the years.
What had you been doing before you got into the river running business?
Well, I was a student at UCLA in 1962 when we floated Glen Canyon, and then in 1966 I became a school teacher, junior high school math teacher in Southern California, and so I had summers free, and that is actually where I met Ed George. When the principal introduced me to the other faculty there as a river runner, one guy came up after the morning session and stuck out his hand and introduced himself to me as a guy who had done a lot of river trips down the Grand Canyon. He had worked as a guide for George White back in the 50s, and so he was very excited about the potential for being able to come and do some more trips in the Grand Canyon. And so I had bought some rafts from somebody who was actually on this trip. That's Woody Reef, who used to run bullhead expeditions. We were never sure if that was a place name or referring to the name of the individual. Woody told me this story, so I think he wouldn't mind me retelling it. But these rafts, we had 4 of these 10-man rafts. Those became the nucleus around which I started running trips with Ed Gooch in 1967.
Boy, there's so much. When I think about it, we really are going to have to sit down and do this again. I guess we shouldn't get into all that Sobek stuff. Well, maybe we should. So you've got. Maybe we should just talk a little bit about the growth of the company.
Okay, in 1971, there was a pretty significant earthquake in Southern California, and my wife, being from Minnesota, was totally freaked out by the fact that the ground in Los Angeles shook, and she wanted to leave Los Angeles. And sometime previous to that earthquake, I had promised faithfully that I would never leave teaching in order to become the head of a river company. But when this earthquake happened, Pam said, "George, if that's what it's going to take to get you out of Los Angeles, so be it." So we moved in 1974, in the spring of 1974, up to Angels Camp, California, which was the home of California rafting and where we were running the Stanislaus River. Up until that point, we'd been doing a lot of weekend trips there, and fitting that into the time period from Friday afternoon through late Sunday night or Monday morning was a little bit problematic. So we decided it'd be a nice place to move, and that's where we started our family. And it was a nice rural environment in the foothills of the Sierra at about the 1,500 foot level, and right in the backyard of the Stanislaus River and the Tuolumne River, and pretty close to the American River and the Merced River. So that became the focus of a business running California river trips. And in 1974, I got a letter from Richard Bangs, who was writing very eloquently about the fact that there were some rivers in Ethiopia that needed to be run, and he wanted to hook up with some Grand Canyon outfitter who hopefully had a list of clients that he could tap into to send over to Ethiopia. So we formed a loose alliance in 1974, and then Sobek did start running these trips in Ethiopia on the Omo River and on the Blue Nile. And Sobek Expeditions was formed as a separate company of which I was a partial owner. And Sobek then was based in Angels Camp also. And initially Sobek had 1 room in the OARS office, and then it grew to 2 rooms in the OARS office. And over time, as they continued to build their business running international trips, they acquired the entire office, and OARS, the company that I was primarily responsible for, sort of got squeezed out into another building. And since we all enjoyed running river trips, it was exciting certainly to go on some of these foreign trips, although because I had 2 children by that time, and Richard and my other partner John were pretty much footloose, I was the one that stayed home and managed the Sobek business while they were off in Pakistan or New Guinea or some other place. But I did get on a few interesting first descents in Chile, and in Indonesia we went down a river, the Alas River, on the island of Sumatra. So that was certainly enjoyable.
Yeah. So you were on the first descent of the Bio.
The first descent of the Bio. My cousin was with the Park Service down there, and he had written me for a number of years about this river that he thought could just be really exciting to run. And so we went down there in 1978 and did an aerial surveillance of the river and figured that most of it looked like it was runnable. And so we put some rafts on the river and floated it in January of 1978, and it really was a spectacularly beautiful river. sort of a combination of the Middle Fork of the Salmon with some of the large hydraulics of the Grand Canyon, and hence we named the biggest rapid down there Lava South.
So it was your cousin's idea, sent your cousin through your cousin who even thought of running that.
Right. He had been on loan to the National Park Service in Chile for a number of years, and so it was his instigation that actually got us down there to run the Bio.
And you've gone. Did you go and do the Omo and some of those other
I
ones?
never got to Ethiopia, and I was going to go in the fall of 1974, and at the time there was a little recession in the United States, and having just quit my job as a teacher, I figured that I'd better really stay home and concentrate on the promotional aspects of the business to make sure that we were going to be able to stay in Angels Camp.
Well, it's amazing to me how many incredible adventures that whole operation has spawned. Well, just the river running.
Well, it's certainly taken us all in many different directions, certainly that we couldn't have foreseen at the time we started doing this.